Good evening, everyone. Dumelang, Sanbonani. Welcome to this inaugural Awakened Dialogue on Race. Thanks to Nonkululeko, Gobodo. My name is Clement Manyatela, and I'm a television and radio broadcaster. And I'm so honored this evening to be part of this, and I'll call it a movement, Nonku, because ultimately, what we need to walk away from this dialogue with is some new perspective, is some better understanding, some empathy, perhaps. That is what is going to drive the change in our attitudes, I think. We obviously know that we have a complex history in this country. The improvement on our race relations, if we're being honest, has really been sluggish, if we're really being honest. I think we pretend to get along for peace sake, and some of us do. Some of us genuinely get along, but do we genuinely understand each other's contexts? Do we genuinely understand each other's realities? And how are we going to understand that when we are not talking? And how are we going to talk when we are so quick to label each other whenever we start these conversations? Which is why I think this dialogue like this is so important, because an honest conversation about race has been long overdue, because it's been impeded by the fear to be labeled as racist, by the fear to be labeled as having a victim mentality. But what we are trying to do with this dialogue is to create a safe space, free of judgment, a safe space where all of us individually can self-reflect, we can question, we can be vulnerable, and have this bold conversation. So I want to invite you this evening to really feel comfortable today. I think all of us understand how difficult this conversation is, but it's also a brave conversation to have. And I think the fact that all of us are here just demonstrates how brave we are to be part of this conversation. So please be safe, feel open, feel free to be genuine, to be human. Can we do that? Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. So, we're going to start with a panel discussion for about 45, 50 minutes or so, and I'll introduce the panelists in a moment. They will just lay the foundation of what we are trying to discuss today. And then we're going to bring in someone who will help facilitate a dialogue amongst each other, because this is not the panelists talking to you. This is all of us having a conversation with each other. So that is going to come after we finish laying the foundation with the panel. And you can raise your inputs, you can ask your questions as well. But first, please help me welcome Dr. William Mpofu from Wits University, who will welcome us.
Most times, intellectual and academic disciplines are thinking about themselves. You find a sociologist to be busy talking about sociology. A psychologist will be busy talking about psychology. A philosopher will be busy talking about philosophy. When there's work outside the discipline to be done by that discipline. I'm saying this not just to celebrate to sell, but also to recognize this event where intellectuals, activists, and other committed people are meeting to engage with one of the most troubling subjects of our life, for our condition, and our history as human beings. I think this guy must be found, and when he is found, he must be dealt with. The person who ever started the idea that human differences can be criminalized, that human differences can be weaponized, that human differences can be used by one against another. That person committed the first crime against humanity. That if I'm not like you in gender, if I'm not oriented like you in sexuality, if I don't have the same skin color with you, if I don't come from the same geography, the same nationality with you, if I'm not able the same with you in body and mind, then there's something wrong with me. That's the first crime against humanity. That day, the idea was generated to say being different is a crime. That's the day human criminality, that's the day crimes against humanity were generated. I'm saying these words, colleagues, to welcome us to this difficult but necessary conversation. As my colleague said, I come from the Vet Center for Diversity Studies. We are just some 13 floors above here. We do the work of research into these matters. Our paradigm, our philosophy is critical diversity literacy, where we investigate these issues and in their intersectionality, in their length and width, we attempt. We recruit students from honors, masters, PhD, and postdoctoral fellows. And we also host researchers from elsewhere that come to push this research on critical diversity literacy, decolonization, philosophy of liberation, and all that.
Book. And it was through the journey of writing that book, and I encourage you to get the book outside, Awaken to My True Self. We launched it a couple of months ago. It's an incredible book. It's so encouraging, it's so inspirational, but it also helps you in your own journey of healing, your own journey of awakening to your true self. And I think in that book, Mam Nonku reflects on our race relations, on her own experience around race in corporate South Africa, just individually in different communities. And I think it's from that experience that she's felt the need to create this kind of platform where you and I can have these honest conversations. So please help me welcome the founder and CEO of Awakened Global, Nonkululeko Gobodo.
Good evening, everyone, and those who are online. You ran away, you should have been here in the room. I suppose it's safe to have a conversation behind the screen. Well, I really want to thank you for coming. You know, when I conceived this idea of having this dialogue, I was like, who's gonna come? I mean, this is a difficult conversation. Who's going to come and have this conversation? But here you are, you know, you've been so courageous. You've come out because it needs to be heard, right? We need to have these conversations. And we're going to have the panel discussion, and I'll share more around, you know, my ideas around this issue. But I just want to talk about Awakened first. Awakened was born out of my book. You know, I wrote a book and I called it Awakened. And out of that, then Awakened was born. And I think when I was starting, I didn't even know what I really wanted to do with it. But I knew that I had this burden to contribute towards race and gender inequality. How do I do that? I didn't know. So I have this wonderful team of people who keep pushing me and pushing me and pushing me. And, you know, the book was launched and it was a success. And people are like, okay, where are you taking us? You know, you are saying we must awaken. What does that mean? And we had to think and come up with ideas. And we came up with the idea of a podcast. And we call the podcast Unconditioned Mind, because I think for this journey, we really need to uncondition our minds. And then we thought we'd start these dialogues, and this is the first one on race. We thought, let's start with the difficult one of race. And I don't even think the gender one is that easy either. I'm sure Prof will agree with me. And so let's journey together using these dialogues, this unconditioned mind. This is a movement for me. And people always ask me, how do we join? How do we? No, it's not an organization. It's a movement. A movement must not be controlled. It must be allowed to evolve in its own way. And we're here now because it's evolving in its own way. I'm really excited about this dialogue. I'm excited about the dialogue that we'll have later, you know, among ourselves, because we've got to move to a new place around this topic. We've been skirting the issues for too long. And so please feel free. This is a safe space. We want the honest, authentic discussions around this topic. Otherwise, we live the same way we came. Thank you so much.
And on that note, we are going to start with our panel conversation. Let me introduce the guests and our panelists here. You already have met and heard from Nonkululeko Gobodo. We have Professor Melissa Steyn, Founding Director at the Vet Center for Diversity Studies. And we have Carla van Bouillon, who's a relationship specialist and certified DeMartini method facilitator. And maybe we'll kick off with you, Nonku. Help us understand what about your experience and observation made you realize the urgent need for an honest conversation like this?
Yeah. A problem needs resolution, right? Whenever there's a problem, we don't rest until it is resolved. It doesn't matter whether it is personal or it's societal, it's always demanding resolution. If, for instance, you have an issue in your relationship, whether it's with a spouse or a colleague or a friend, you make sure that it is resolved. And when it is resolved, you know that it is resolved because there's a shift in the energy, right? There's more peace, it's healthier, so you know when it has shifted. So we know that the issue of race has not been resolved. We all know that. And we are sitting in this situation where we have a matter amongst ourselves that is not resolved. Doesn't matter where it started, you know, we're here now, we're this generation, and we need to do something about it. And I look at our nation, right? We're all worried about the direction it is taking. And I think to myself, okay, we've given politicians 30 years to take us to the promised land, whatever it looks like. But we know definitely this is not what we thought it would be. And it doesn't look like they're gonna take us there. So it means then the solutions must come from the people. And it is only when we work together that we can rise up and solve the problems facing our nation. So we're stronger together than divided. How are we going to do that if we're divided, right? We can't do that if we're divided. And so I look at us. We seem to be waiting around race now. I look at Black people, they're waiting for white people to change, and then their situation will change. And that puts them in a position of victim helplessness. I look at white people, I don't know what their issue is. I hope to hear today what the issue is. Because I live in my own world and other people live in their own worlds. And I don't know what that world looks like. But we do know that there's this issue of guilt around the past and being defensive about the past. And there's also an issue of, okay, we have privilege, you know. I don't really want to lose my privilege. What I want to see today is, can we put down the masks for today so that we can have an authentic, honest conversation about this race? I want to live here having understood something I didn't know. I don't want to live as I was, I came. And I'm hoping that as we deliberate among ourselves, we will, each one of you, even if it's a small shift, if I shift a little bit around this issue of race, I'll really be happy. And if each one of us, you can go home and say,
all right, let's clap. Thank you, Dr. Mpofu.
and say, yeah, aha, this is what I was missing, right? And I hope then that even as we have the dialogue with the audience, we'll be open and honest about how we feel. As long as we have this view of moving forward, the last thing I want, and I'm not saying let's not say how we feel and all of that, and people online, please be ready to participate also. I'm not saying let's not share our feelings and all of that. But each time I just hear the past being rehashed and rehashed and rehashed, I always wonder, how is this gonna help me move forward? I'm not saying the past didn't happen. It happened and it needs to be acknowledged, and you can't heal anything you've not acknowledged. And I hope today there would be some healing that also takes place, and I'm sure we'll talk more around that as we talk.
And I suppose, Prof, for that healing to happen, we've got to really appreciate and understand where we come from and where we find ourselves. I was saying to Prof earlier, I enjoyed her paper. Go read about the concept of whiteness and some of the discourses that are resistant to transformation, which was so fascinating. Throughout that work, Prof, in diversity studies, what can you share with us about why we are still here, where we are stuck and we are scared to have these honest conversations? And it looks like we don't have solutions because we're not talking about them. What is the issue?
Is this on? So I would probably, I would probably want to nuance everything that we've just introduced. I've done a bit of research that I've just been publishing recently about white South Africans who've left South Africa and how they fit into the societies that they move into. So the research has been in other African countries, Tanzania, Zambia, and the US particularly. And what strikes me when I read, go through the transcripts and look at the discourse of those white South Africans, I'm struck by how much we actually have moved. This is not a papering over the cracks or saying, like we've done so well or anything, not in the least, but that's not what I'm saying. But there is a tide that has been pulling us along. We've had a lot of shared experiences, a lot of events that have happened, and so I do want to say that we're stuck, and we need, we obviously absolutely need to analyze what's going on and how we move forward. But I do just want to say that we must recognize that we are not the same people that we were in 1994. We really aren't. I had a student, it was after an event, she was a student leader, and we were sitting and drinking some wine together, and she says to me, "But nothing's changed." And I thought to myself, well, having come from where I've come from, the chances that you as a young Black student would be sitting here next to me, we're having a drink, and that you would say to me, "Nothing's changed," was zilch, So I do feel we also need to be encouraged by the fact that we are shifting. But that's not the sort of line that I would normally push Clement at all. And talking about, why it's so hard, I think we also have to recognize, I'm sort of pleading that we must give ourselves some slack in the conversation, in that, for the past 500 years, for at least half a millennium, the world has been shaped through discourses of race. It's been right at the heart of modernity, since the early so-called voyages of discovery, but the beginning of European exploitation and conquest around the world, race was a central, if not the central trope that shaped our whole world. So, and I mean the globe, all right? So we're talking about something that we have to unthink, and we've got to somehow find our way through it, but none of us actually has any idea of what a world would be that's not shaped through the concept of race. So we are literally creating the path as we're walking it, you know? So I think that that's also really important to recognize that we're struggling because, you know, there's no blueprint, there's no 6 easy steps. We've got to find our way through it.
Mm.
And then I also just want to get back to what William said about, you know, the constructions of difference. What we are trying to do is to form a society that the fundamental assumptions, the underlying principles of the society are 180 degrees the opposite of what we were, you know? So we're trying to create a society that must function from fundamentally different understandings of self and other. And I think that this is not an easy task. I don't see anywhere else that has done better than us. And I think also about the point why we don't talk, but actually, again, if you compare South Africa with pretty well anywhere else, you'll actually see that the level of conversation is quite vibrant in our society, you know? And I mean, I often listen to your show, for example, Clement, and I think, whoa, you know, you wouldn't hear these kinds of conversations easily anywhere else. Mm. So yes, we're in this moment. We're in a moment where we're experiencing a sense of crisis. We need to do a lot of self-reflection. We need to do a lot of work, and that's a good thing, because for us to shift, we need a sense of urgency. If we don't have a sense of urgency, people are in their comfort zones and they remain complacent, and we don't move at all.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing that we get to this point where, like we're saying, we've got to have these conversations. We've got to grapple with this stuff. We've got to make ourselves vulnerable and get engaged. So yeah, I think that's what I'll say just to start.
Yeah.
I just want to pick up on something that Prof said there, that I often think that, you know, this generation, we didn't invent racism or sexism or all the isms, some of the isms, I don't know, maybe the others are old. We are looking for something we've never seen, right? This generation. And I think of myself as a Black person, sorry, that before 1652, Africans were living here, you know, having their own social dynamics, whatever they were at the time, which were not dissimilar from Europe, actually, fighting over, you know, territory and things like that. But they never saw themselves as Black and inferior. For instance, there was no such concept, right? So I see how much we're spending time in understanding this issue of Blackness, which for me is an illusion, actually, because it never existed before 1652. And we're talking about how racism started during that time of the Atlantic slave trade and all of that. But social inequality was always there, right? There was always someone at the bottom, whether it was the slave or feudal system or whatever. Women are always at the bottom. So this myth of racism and race is, for me, is really couched around this whole thing of, you know, the sort of the food chain. Someone must be at the top of the food chain, even in the wild, right? So we're grappling with racism, but is that the real issue? Is that the real issue, or is social inequality not the real issue? Shouldn't we be dealing with, you know, this issue of social inequality? And who can keep me at the bottom, really? Unless I sort of allow it to some extent. And I'm not excusing what happened to Black people and Africans and people like that. So I just wanted to say, even as we deliberate, can we start to unpack these things? Because Aristotle said back then, I'm a scholar now, you know, I associate with scholars. He said, it is right in nature that some should be superior and others inferior, some dominating and others dominated. And he included slaves, barbarians, and women as those who should be dominated, who should be considered inferior. So this whole concept of inferiority didn't start with the slave trade. It was there. I mean, with that Atlantic one, it was there before.
And we'll come back to it. Let me just bring in Carla first. Carla, because I suppose people carry wounds, right? And often when you have these conversations, there's an expectation of at least an acknowledgement of your pain, that I see you. And sometimes we struggle to do that, and I think that's where the blockages sometimes are, because the other side either is not prepared, or perhaps it's not ready, or it's not understanding your wounds. Just help us understand, because you deal with people, you deal with relationships, you deal with institutions like schools, churches. Are we acknowledging the wounds, and are we healing them? Because that's where we've got to start. We need to heal them, but it feels good to also have Carla see my wound.
Thank you, Clement. I'm thinking of and I'm listening as well to this conversation, that we are all aware of the spectrum of racism. Like, you've got the broad spectrum of like extremity, and then you've got milder people. But what it basically gets down for me is, like, if we actually all have to be honest here, we've had white people, as a white person, I had white people wound me and hurt me. And I had Black people that are very kind to me and very generous to me. But I also had the experience of both of them. But I carry those wounds with me on that spectrum. And I'm actually, usually in the counseling world, we make a joke of saying that usually the people that come to us for counseling are not the people that need it the most. That's the people that don't get to come to visit you. And that's kind of what I feel today here. It's like, some people, all of you made the effort, booked it in your calendar, you showed up, you're here. The people online are there, they're showing up. So it kind of feels to me, if we want to take one step forward, we must ask the quality question, in the sense of, how can we get those people that are on the end of the spectrum of really not willing to have these conversations at all, because they have a perception that they were wounded that badly, that that's unsafe for them to have a conversation like this at all. But also adding on to it, I love it that you say that the urgency needs to be there. Because in a sense, if you think in terms of, let me give this practical example of all of you, of engaging you in this as well. Think of something that you really value, something that's really important to you, that you want to keep, almost like your new book that's important to you. You want to keep it close to you. You want to protect it and make sure that it doesn't deteriorate. Now, the same thing with our country. If we don't value our country, something that you value, you will protect it, you will look after it. If we don't protect our country, if we don't value our country, it will deteriorate. If we don't value it, someone else that values it more will come in. So we have to value our healthcare systems, our political systems, our educational systems, and all of that. So that's wonderful that we've got that urgency, so that we as South Africans actually get the opportunity to experience the richness of what's possible in this country. So to really value that, but to get to the wounds and how important that is, that because when we carry wounds, we're going to stay stuck in the past. We're going to keep on that. Anything that you can't say thank you to, and I mean from a real deep gratitude point of view, something that you don't want to change it, where you say, thank you for what is as it is, and now we're moving forward. When we get to that point, if we don't deal with the wounds, then we're not going to get there. So to put this also again in a practical manner, to really just understand that, imagine a dartboard, like playing darts, everybody. So in essence, we all know we are the same. We know in essence we are the same, but in expression we are different. The experiences we had, the homes we grew up in, the career paths we've chosen, and all of those things. But now imagine that your essence is the bullseye. That's the middle of the dartboard. If you stay in your essence, then you live from your heart, you live from your core, you don't live from your wounds. But now we have experiences where we perceived something to be only painful, which is also an illusion, but because everything in life is in duality, it's inequality, actually. So now you experience the pain. Now you build a wall around you. So that's the first concentric sphere that you put around your bullseye. Now you had another experience. Now it was, whether it was with a white person or black person or Hispanic or Asian, it doesn't matter, with what color even it was. You've had a painful experiencing regarding a person. Now you built a wall around you. And so we keep on going through life, building walls around ourselves. Now imagine that each one of us is like a slice of the dartboard, like everybody is one of the slices. When you live so much out of your essence, when you have built so many walls around you and accumulated all that pain and you haven't dealt with that pain, you are on the furthest outest sphere. Now imagine trying having access with the other person, the other slice on the other side. It's impossible. It's a journey very far. So for people that was wounded extremely, or in their perception, they were wounded. We all get wounded. It's not unique to us. That's our human experience. We need that to grow. Our challenge, we need equal challenge as much as we need support to grow, actually. So when we don't deal with those wounds, when we keep on staying on the periphery, on the outer side, the less access we have to other people, the less we are going to find the similarities, the more we're going to see the differences, the more we're going to separate the unseparables and divide the undividables, where everything is actually in illusion, integrated and united already. So as we see in natural laws as well. So when you deal with those wounds and you break down another wall and another wall, the more you get to go back into your core, your authentic self, your essence, there where your genius and your leadership is awakened and activated. And that's where leaders stand up. And that's from where you relate with other people. Because then the access is instant. The access is close. It's not distant.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to deal with the wounds.
Yeah. So, Prof, how do we then deal with the wounds? Because we talk about, and I normally always say, even on the show, we all have to learn and unlearn. If you're born in this country with the context and the history we have, white or black, you are socialized in a particular way. And it doesn't matter how liberal and progressive your parents are. Once you step out of your home, you get into a society that is socialized in a particular way, that has context and history. So I have had to want to unlearn certain things. Right, as a black person, white people have got to unlearn certain things. How do we navigate that when the systems themselves are not really changing? Because it's exciting to say, oh, let's learn and learn. But when the chain that Mam Nonku talks about still stays as it is it even possible to go through that journey?
That's a good question. Is it on?
Yeah.
So I think that we need to understand that each one of us is a node in the system. Because so often, very often, when people have these conversations, they talk about, people's agency and the system as if they're two separate things, as if institutions exist in a completely sort of like abstract way, separate from the human being. So very often I've heard people say things like about apartheid, that it wasn't us, it was the system, and I've heard people theorize this quite eloquently, that, you've got to distinguish between the individual and the system. But what that leaves out is that system of apartheid could not have functioned if it wasn't for the people who, to use the sexist term, manned it. We staffed it. You know, as white South Africans, we taught in the whites-only schools. You know, we instituted, we executed the labor laws. You know, we farmed the farms and treated workers as if they were human beings. You know, I mean, the institutions were only able to continue for all those years because we were it. You know, so I think it's really, really important for us to break down that dichotomy and to recognize that you and me and everyone else, we are also the system. We're individuals with agents, but we are also the system. And so it comes down to what are the choices and the decisions that we make? What are the arguments we put forward in every committee that we're on? How do we actually work to change the system through our own agency within those places that are structural? You know, so I think that's really important, because we have to change the norms in our society. And that means, for example, that we mustn't be complacent with being bystanders. You know, if we want to change the norms in society, we've got to speak out. We've got to, if I experience something where someone has been, you know, insulted or something, I have to speak out. It's not always easy. You know, it often takes quite a lot of courage, because you will find that you, as the person who speaks out, you're seen as the troublemaker, as opposed to the person who's perhaps said the thing that's really, really problematic. People are embarrassed by you, you know? And similarly, if you call out racism, you know, you get labeled the racist. And the person whose behavior has been so unproblematic becomes the victim, you know? So, but we have to change the norms. We've got to work towards what is it that we allow and want in our society as people, and then how do we make sure that this works through all our institutions, all our organizations.
Yeah, I want you to respond to the same question, Mama, from your own experience. Because when I read the book, you do talk about your experiences interacting with Black and white in corporate, and I think all of us here have been in instances where, in some instances where there are some Black people that really deeply still feel inferior. And I've had that complex myself. You know, when I was starting in my career, I used to respect white bosses more at work. And I didn't realize that until I started to do some reading and unlearning. I realized that, hold on, why do you respect the deadline when it's imposed by a white person, but when it's a Black person, it's like, it's okay, we can deal with it. How are people navigating that even in corporate? You know, where you have got to sit here in the boardroom or in the workspace and you want your voice to be heard, but you also feel like you've got to dim your lights because you feel you're not enough. That can be really tricky.
Yeah. As we're saying, we live in a society that has conditioned us, right? White people have been conditioned, Black people have been conditioned to believe certain things about themselves and white people. And the thing about being conditioned, and if you can separate from race, for instance, and go to religion, when you are conditioned to believe certain things about religion, for instance, you believe those things, whether they're true or not is not a factor. They say this is so, and I believe it, and you act and behave accordingly. So we've all been socialized by this society, and then you get into the workplace, which we've all had that experience. And unfortunately for me, I grew up in the former Transkei, which was not as affected by apartheid as the rest of South Africa, for instance. And so growing up, I knew that there was discrimination and so on, but it was when I started working that I started experiencing it for the first time. I'm 19 years old, I walk into this job and the white manager asked me what my name is, and I say, I'm Nonkululeko. And he says, wow, that's just too difficult. I'm just gonna call you Mary. I'm
Mary?
like, Mary.
Not even non.
I'm like, you will do no such thing. You will do no such thing. You will call me by my name. You will practice my name. That was like baptism of fire. Where is this now? Where I even have to, be called something else. And because I'd grown up as a shy girl who my mother was worried about me because I was more quiet than my siblings. And I started to adopt this thing and had a low self-esteem. When I found myself, I just made sure that I never allow anybody to define who I am. So when I walked into corporate, I would say to myself, your opinions of me don't define me. You don't even know me. That's how I survived there. But, people come into corporate, you are sharing in the slice of the pie, you have a seat at the table. And there's this stereotype of Black person or woman that is defined. And you feel compelled to fit into this stereotype for your own safety and security, to be accepted. You know how you want to belong and be accepted for acceptance. So, because if you don't, then you are sort of harassed and you don't get the opportunities because you are seen as the rebel and things like that. So people opt for self-abandonment so that I can have the seat at the table because I need the job, right? And I worry about that if we then opt for self-abandonment, if Black people come into these spaces and bring half of themselves, because, self-abandonment says you can't bring your authentic self, right? You must bring this shadow self who must comply with the stereotype and things like that. If Black people are bringing half of themselves in corporate and not their authentic selves, what are they contributing? Because they're not contributing fully. How will they ever reach their full potential, right? Because the white person there who's free to be themselves are going up and up and up, and you are not able to keep up, because to keep everybody comfortable. Can you imagine how uncomfortable that is, where you have to self-abandon to keep everybody happy and lose yourself in the process, actually. Because at some level, you believe that maybe I am inferior because, white people have always seemed superior ever since, right? So we need to create these safe spaces so that we can start to have these honest conversations. Because I'm not sure what the fear is exactly. And maybe we should answer that question today. Why is there a fear of people being their authentic selves? Right? Because it's there. I mean, you sense it and you respond to it by that self-abandonment. Or you rebel, and when you rebel, unfortunately, then it's like you create drama and you are then labeled, as we're saying, you're then labeled as the one who is difficult and all of that and so on.
Yeah.
So,
and I hope that question will probably be answered by the audience as well, right? What is so fearful about it? Because sometimes we forget that we've also had a system that has literally suppressed your identity and your authentic self, because the longest time you were not allowed to be your authentic self culturally. And now you get into the space where, oh yeah, we're coexisting, but for decades and centuries, that was suppressed. Is it that easy to come out then? And I don't know, but we'll explore it. Do you think, Carla, Please come in.
Actually love to add on that, thinking now coming again from a human behavior perspective, knowing that each one of us has got a unique fingerprint and we cannot be right or wrong for our fingerprint. But now we go and compare it to each other. It's like, but yours is higher or better or nicer or shinier than mine. So we compare things that shouldn't be compared actually. And now we go and do that with our internals as well. We've got an internal fingerprint in terms of what we internally really care about and really are interested in that we want to read up on and mentally expand on. So comparing your hierarchy of values, the things that's most important to you, to someone else, is detrimental. It's like, I think it was Emerson that said that imitating someone else just to fit in is ignorance. And to envy someone else is suicide. It's going to end up somewhere because you can never be the same version of someone else. You're always going to be a watered down version of someone else, but you can always be the best version of yourself. So with that one, that comes from us in our human behavior, giving us feedback. Everything in the world is a feedback mechanism. Our body, our physiology is giving us a feedback. Our psychology is giving us a feedback. Our sociology is giving us a feedback to grow to our maximum potential. And even theological events, mysteries that we would explain is guiding us back to feedback. So whenever we go above equilibrium and we puff ourselves up and we exaggerate ourselves, now let's imagine this. You've had a very great day at work. You're cocky. You're excited. You're elated. You come back home, your wife or your kids is going to humble you immediately. And they just instantly, it's life is bringing you back to equilibrium. You don't even have to kind of do it yourself. On a day where you really feel down, where you feel like, I don't know if I can do this. You just want to cry. You don't know how you're going to manage. Someone is picking you up. Someone is bringing you back to equilibrium. When you exaggerate yourself or you minimize yourself, that is not your true authentic self. And what happens is we take that and look up to people and we're too humble to admit what we see in them is inside ourselves. Because again, back to the essence. In essence, we all have got the same traits, qualities, capabilities, potentialities, all of it. We all have the same potentialities. But there's also a part where we are sometimes too proud to admit that what we see in other people, we look down on people, and I'm too proud to say that I will never do that. I can never be like that. And that is where sometimes we have to be humbled and say that when I spot it, I got it. If I see someone do something, a specific trait, then that is within me as well. And at that moment, when you have that reflective awareness, where you reflect, where you see that what the seer, the seer, and that what I'm seeing, what's happening, and the seen is the same. That's reflective awareness and not deflective awareness, where we're separating each other, where it's deflecting, I'll never be that, and I'm separating from someone else. The more you integrate, I believe it's Schopenhauer that said, the more you make everything and everyone yourself, the more you become your authentic self. And your authentic self can never be wrong for something. The magnificence of who you truly are can never overcome any fantasy that you can ever put on it. And when you become that authentic self, that's where your unique leadership step up, and you never compare that to other people. You take inspired action. You're not fearful. It's like when you look up to someone, you're careful. You walk on eggshells. It's like, I cannot have these conversations. I'm not allowed to say what I think. When you're too proud, when you look down on people, you project on them. You care less. You talk down on someone and you say, believe what I believe, become like I am. You want to change them relative to what you are, instead of honoring them for who they are and honoring yourself for your own values. And that becomes a carefrontation, not a confrontation. When you really care about yourself and someone else enough, because you've seen how it served you, you've owned that we've got the same within us, then you actually, on a heart level, where you really see eye to someone and you say, let's speak, let's have a conversation, not a monologue going on by myself, but a dialogue between all of us.
Yeah. So, Prof, I mean, we're here to share our genuine experiences, right? We're here to share our genuine experiences. And hopefully we can all be frank and honest. And I think, Carola, you raise an important point about authenticity. And I am not sure as a Black person if I have felt the environment has been conducive for me to be authentic. And that's how I've often felt. I mean, I fight it, you know, as you've said on my show, I try raise the conversations no matter, it's like it's forceful almost, right? You spoke earlier about someone saying, I'll just call you Mary because Nonkululeko, it's a bit tricky. That's a reality today. How? But we want people to be authentic. How are you being authentic? And how can you be authentic when the system perhaps or the environment is not allowing? So what I'm asking is, what changes do we even need to make in our own individual lives so that tomorrow when I get to work, I make Nonkululeko or John or Jeremy feel comfortable to be their authentic self? And the second part of the question is, do you think, because there are easy triggers when we talk about race, right? It's easy to be triggered, right? Black people will easily be triggered, or white people will easily be triggered because it's like we're not understanding each other. So do you think we've been having the conversations in a conducive manner? And tomorrow when we step out of here, how do we create a platform where there can be that genuity?
Okay. So I think the question of authentic self is actually a difficult one, because in our analysis, Clement, of all the work that we do around the construction of difference in Nonku, if I could just link this to what you were saying about inequality, you know, the question is how difference gets constructed in order to make a difference in material sort of terms, in actual terms. So, you know, our human variation is just that, it's variation, but social groups make certain differences matter. All right. So that's the construction of race, was that. It was so, you know, I'd love to come back to the question around that. So, but the construction of race is designed. It's the discourse that makes it live is active. It's intentional to actually create haves and have-nots. You know, those with more power and those with less power. That's what it did. It was intentional to create white people in such a way that they could enter into the economies of the countries that they were conquering, and you know, the people that they were enslaving, as superiors, as people who could have the most benefit. All right, and the goodies would be sapped away from the people who get racialized as Black to the people who get racialized as white. And part of what happens at a broad systemic level, and then also obviously at the level of the individual psyche, is that we internalize these things. It's just exactly what you were talking about, Nonku. We internalize it. So the oppression becomes internalized. It becomes part of the way we understand ourselves. And that is systemic. The system wouldn't work if it weren't systemic. That you have some people whose sense of themselves has been shaped through experiences of being dominant, and people whose sense of themselves has been shaped through experiences of being subordinate in the system. So the question of authenticity becomes really difficult. Like, how do I know who I actually really am when, you know, I've been shaped through these processes? And, you know, I can relate to that very strongly as a woman in my own experience, having worked all my life in universities, which are very patriarchal institutions. But, you know, the Freud asked the question, what do women want? Well, how must we know what we want?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, a patriarchy tells us, you know, we want to be in bikinis and we want to be draping our bodies over sports cars, and we want, you know, so how do we know what we want?
Exactly.
You know, so I think the question of authenticity becomes really difficult. And how to create spaces which doesn't mean that we don't keep working for it, because we have to keep, peeling off the layers of the onion to try to understand how our conditioning has shaped us, and how can we unlearn what we're talking about, these various messages that we've been given, but it's also important to just understand what it really is. That helps. Like if we really understand that this is really about power, that's what it is. It's about power in order to dominate and control society. That's what this is about, then it helps for us to reclaim our own power. But creating environments, I think this is a really important question, and I think we have to be looking at how do we try to regulate, for example, meetings, so that everybody gets a turn to speak. I mean, these are sort of like, it seems like something so simple, but do we consciously think about things like the airtime? Because people who've been, again, socialized into dominant spaces are comfortable with hearing their own voices. In those spaces, they're comfortable with expressing their opinions, and they're sure that their opinions are worth listening to and that everybody's going to benefit from hearing them, So we have to, I think, very consciously work against those. It sounds like it's trivial, but those are the things I think that we have to become very mindful of.
I had the
Yeah.
Okay.
But when dialogue has not started, someone is raising their hand.
Yes,
It's like,
yes,
hey, let's go, let's go.
We're coming.
But when this socialization says that I see you as inferior, and therefore, even when you speak, if you experience this thing in meetings, someone will raise an idea, come up with an idea, and no one would listen. And then a white person or a man would just change a few words and say exactly the same thing. And suddenly, it's important and let's act on it. And these are the things that we experience, because, I've had situations where white people certainly can't even hear you. Yes, we have a different accent or whatever, but you can see that the inability to hear has nothing to do with my accent. It's like a black person is talking. It's like there's a veil that comes upon them that they can't even hear, because we've been so socialized to believe that she can't have an opinion, and whatever she says is not important, and all of that. And so when none of us are authentic, this is what I was saying, that we're looking for something we've never seen before, because none of us are authentic, because all of us have been shaped by this society. So you sort of have to dig deep down and find our true selves. So I want to then ask and say, what is the role of Black people in all of this? Because this whole thing of looking at white people, can you imagine if your whole freedom is based on someone else changing their minds about you, or changing their opinion about you, or how they act and behave towards you? But Black people are not helpless either, right? What should we be doing as Black people then to start this journey, which is my whole issue that I raise in my book around? We can't wait for other people to change, right? We need to start, our own journey of saying, okay, I've been shaped to believe this is who I am. I'm inferior, I'm incapable, I'm small, I'm this. But deep down, I know I am not. How do I find that person who is not small, who's not inferior, who's none of these things that have been said? Because, I'm standing here, no one can think I'm inferior, right?
Nonku, I would actually like to add on that, as a white person actually sitting here. The funny thing is that I promise you I'm feeling the same way most of the time as well, because sometimes I also look up to other people and I also feel I'm not competent or I'm not as equal as them. And fascinatingly, on the topic of accents, that was secretly one of my biggest issues. A funny thing, so I think I might have told this to my husband and nobody else knows this, but some of my family sitting here as well. But I was embarrassed about my Afrikaans, lekker Afrikaans accent. So I like literally it's like, yo, way to go, Carla, now to make this public here today and online. But either way, when I went, you know, like the calls that you've got, I tried to answer the phone like when you have to give your phone number 082 so that nobody noticed the 082. I am Afrikaans, please don't notice that. So I literally had the same issue with that, and I'm saying this purposefully to let us realize how the things we focus on is not the right things. If we shift our focus to somewhere else. Now, what happened to me was I was listening to Trevor Noah's comedy stand-up show where he explicitly uses his accent, like elaborately on the Russian accent, the Xhosa, the Zulu, this and that, and the Afrikaans and everything. And for a moment, that broke my thought chain. You know, like when you're in a habit and you're a thought pattern and people are not hearing me, and a moment you break that thought pattern. In that moment when the thought pattern is broken, a new insight, a third option can actually arise. And in that moment, the option arose to me. I remembered how I was traveling in the UK and an Australian guy stopped me and told me, are you from South Africa? Because I really love the South African accent. So somewhere in the world, someone likes a South African accent. In South Africa, I asked myself, why do I love an Italian accent and a French accent and the Russian accent seems so powerful, but I can't be proud of my accent? So that changed my perception. But now let's apply this to race, to our skin color, because that's the one thing that we use to separate our race, to think in terms of different races. We think it's about the skin color. We think it's about the races. It's not about that. If you think in terms of the purpose of what your skin was made for, if all of us, if you kind of like just touch your skin for a second, just feel it and realize that the purpose of a skin is not to differentiate us. It's not to separate us. Your skin, the organ that is actually meant to help you take in this world. Everything we take in this world comes through our skin, through this beautiful organ. So now we go and choose to separate ourselves because of the color. We miss the purpose of the skin. The purpose of the skin is to help you take in what is happening around you. So that is what I would love to use as an analogy for us when we move into the dialogue, to think of what's the most important thing to talk about. Let's not focus on the wrong places. Let's not focus on the problem that we have, but let's focus on the new solutions, the third option that we can come to, that we haven't come together. It's like two molecules coming together to create a third one. The possibility is there when we talk.
So, Kobus, over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for an amazing discussion. And so my work is to facilitate the dialogue. Part of the dialogue is that I think if we want to focus on one of the core issues is how to create equality. And equality happens through dialogue. And dialogue is not that everyone speaks. An important part of dialogue is to listen and to really, really listen. Everyone teaches how to speak. There's prizes for speaking. There is courses for speaking. But it's not the speaking that changes relationships, it's the listening. It's the deep, deep listening. Because with speaking, I don't even need to know about you. But with listening, I need to pay attention to you. So let's do it in that way. That and Carla is going to help me. We work with marriages and relationships, and I work with tension every day. No one show up very friendly in my office, so there's tension every day. And how you solve tension, not just solving tension, but moving to growth, is facilitating deep, deep listening. Then something changes. So what we are going to do, we are going to invite as many as possible that we have time for available to share, to speak. If it's okay with you, we suggest, let's give each person 2 minutes to speak. 2 minutes is 1 minute, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. If it's okay with you, I'm going to take the permission somewhere around 2 minutes. We're not going to be too strict about that, but around 2 minutes to say, can you put a semicolon there? Because the conversation will never end. Just a semicolon for now. And then what we are going to do is that we are going to mirror you. We are going to hear you. But we will do that, me and Carla, but I want all of us to really, really listen. So whoever's going to speak first, I want all of us first to calm down, not think what are we going to say, but let's really, really make space inside us for another reality, to be influenced by another reality, by the one that's speaking. And then I really want the next one that speaks. Think what you want to say now, but I want you, after the first person that's going to speak, and we have listened, let the next person say something totally different than what we will say now. Let us be influenced by the listening. Really pay attention, be influenced, and then from that new influence place, let's say something different, and then listen again, and be influenced again, and then listen again. And maybe that is how equality and dialogue can help us, because this is us, that us can create something that we haven't known, that we are going to say tonight, that we arrive here, because as we are here. So what we want to suggest is that maybe the first two speakers, that we get one person from one black person and one white person that just respond to what you have just heard in 2 minutes. And then we will mirror that, and then let's see what is going to unfold from there. So if I can just get, who is ready? Oh, let's start then. So we have one black person. If you can get one white person. Oh, okay. Good. So we have one, just for the beginning. We start with one black, one white, and then we will continue with that. So,
yeah, that's that. Yeah. Yes.
Good. Good. So let's all pay attention. Can I just get your name?
So I own Brainbow Conscious Creatives, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion storytelling agency. And we operationalize Ubuntu because we've understood that there's such richness in the tools and resources that we already have as people. You know, true Ubuntu says that we're interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent on all that is, not just on each other, but on all that is. And once you start orientating yourself in that manner, you start to see how big you are, how it is impossible to see yourself as inferior because of the fact that you're interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent on Gwebis, on Cebu, on the plants, in the ocean. All of this is you and who you are. And so I would love for us to start looking at the resources that we have. We're so, as human beings, unfortunately, that's just the way our brain works. We look for lack and attack. We look, what's gonna kill me and what's gonna starve me. And usually things that are new are going to do that. And so now that we're having to step out in faith and create something that we've never seen, felt, or experienced, that's when the amygdala attack happens and we're like, I'm not even gonna try. I'm just gonna stay in the safety, even if, and it's slowly killing us. And so just let us also be aware of that sometimes our sociology and our physiology is kind of fighting for space and trying to keep us safe. And a lot of the time we're responding to each other in trauma responses. I think it's my personality to be confrontational, but is it really not a trauma response? And can I actually look at myself and go, okay, how am I putting my power in the hands of someone else, in an institution, in a skin color, in a gender, and not really going to the core and the essence of what and who I am? And so, yeah, that's it.
Well, so let's all just let those words enter us. Let's receive every word. And then if I can mirror you, and if all of you can just through me just be there with those beautiful sharing. So what I hear you say is that for you that everything is connected, everything is interconnected. We are interdependent, and if one start to see that interconnectedness, then we are big. Then there's no way that we can put ourselves in a place that we can be inferior or less. And also part of that is that because everything is interconnected and in connection, that our biology, our psychology, everything, our brain, our reactive part of our brain, our thinking part of our brain, all of us, also inside us, is interconnected. So also maybe just to think that when we get reactive, when we are on pain, maybe that's a trauma response, and to also work with that, restore safety. Kind of, I think there was much more. Did I get in essence what you have said? Thank you, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Good.
My name is Emil from Lyon. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, and thank you, Mamanoku, for creating this environment, for us to openly speak. Yeah, I just want to say, for me as a, it's like just speaking from my heart, like a white South African in South Africa, growing up through apartheid and all that stuff, and just seeing what like my father tried to build in this country in terms of low-cost housing and stuff like that. He was quite involved with that, and just coming from a space of like what you say, you're coming up and you've got the privileges that you get to have, and the what is the thing that I feel, and also I've got two beautiful young children as well, what is their future going to be like in this country if we don't solve this whole thing? They're also white South Africans. You want to give them, I mean, doesn't matter, I think, what color you are, you want to give your kids the opportunity and the opportunities. Like, I mean, I can talk to any parent here, that's what you want for your child. And sometimes I don't feel like I'm so welcome in this country in terms of, what does my future look like in this country? And yeah, that's concerning for me, to be honest.
So this young man standing there, let's put all our focus there. And the thing about listening is you don't need to stop your world for the rest of the world. It's just for the next 2 minutes. Let's pay all of our attention for a moment to the man standing there, sharing something deep. And let us be influenced by that words that's going to come now.
Good evening, good afternoon, whichever one it is. Somewhere in the world, it's different. My name is Frederick. I'm an art producer. So I was listening, and which is a skill I'm still developing. Possibly am one of the youngest amongst you all. So I'm dealing with the situation and my lane, whereas I'm not as ignorant. I do learn other tribal languages, even the way they pronounce, like Kaufela, Zonke, everything. Just it's juiciest pronunciation, because I feel as though when I do that, then it creates an opportunity with that other person on the other, whomever seems to be holding the power. And fortunately and unfortunately, this time around, it's a white person. This is a director. And I seem to be caught up in between knowing myself, programming myself, living throughout that with my own genuinity being jubilant around everyone. However, it seems to come across to that particular person who's of a peculiar skin that I am just arrogant and cocky and I have a big ego. And so I'm aware it affects me. I just don't know how it's affecting me. I do know that I have confidence. That's one thing I know. I live in that truth. Mami said earlier on, when you're perceived as with a complex name, they would dismiss that name and then refer to you as another name, then how do you show up as somebody you don't know? Because you are whom I call you to be, right? Should you be Jonathan, for instance, and I decide to call you, I don't know, Sid, how are you gonna be? How are you supposed to be your authentic self when the environment compels you and suppresses your true reflection? How does one maneuver around that? Thank you.
It was important for you to ask this question. You took the time to be brave, to stand there and to ask this question. And I believe that as much as there's a panel of people having answers, you are the one that thought about that question. You gave some time. I also know that you gave time on thinking about that question. And I know that you also have wisdom on that question. So if I could maybe ask you to be brave one more time, to stand up and share your answer with us, as much as you asked a question today. If you can stand up and share, what do you know? Tap into your wisdom today and share with us, what do you know about your question?
Where I'm at right now is, okay, I'm familiar that I have a certain enthusiasm and it comes across as egotistical. However, thing is, I'm conflicted, you know? Yes, sure, I may love to look upon the Jesus that I've been subjected to, you know, worship. Okay, fine. But now I know the reality, I know the truth. Now I dwell in my truth. Now I live in my life. But now, how do I, like you said, how do I now reduce that a little bit? Somebody mentioned something earlier on, I think it was Mami, Nonkululeko, thank you. Oguti, I don't want to discard myself and then seem to be making everybody else externally happy. You know, I don't want to find myself in a vulnerable spot where, okay, I'm in a new space to learn, right? Okay, fine. Knowing that I'm here to learn is enough. Okay, my cup runneth over, that's okay. I'm here to learn new things. However, when you come in, they're like, you have to unlearn everything. Now they want to strip me away from every other truth that I seem to be living in. That's my essence. And now when I come and defend it, because as a person, you defend your personality, your true identity, right? And I'm definitely sure it's different from everyone. Everybody else has a different identity, similar as the different God. So then now how do I maneuver into this space where I've said to myself, I'm going to humble myself and get in and learn and be a kid. But then now still, it's just not sufficient. They're like, your ego is in the way. How? When I do every other thing that I see somebody else doesn't do, I go the extra mile, you know?
What is the most important thing that you've just said in one sentence? Yes.
I want people to recognize that as much as they recognize the ego, I wasn't aware of.
Yes.
You know, because I didn't go the extra mile. So
Yes.
The question would be now, with the wisdom I have at present, you know, I'd love to know from a different opinion, how can I dwell in this space whereas I've let myself go and say, I want to be a learner, I want to be a student, but they seem to be something that, you know, it's coming in between.
Oh, lovely, lovely.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nizenande Maki, and I am a leadership development practitioner, and I work in cultural and creative industries. And I want to pick up from Frederick's contribution. It was very moving for me, possibly even mildly triggering in this space and conversation, because racism, as I guess a child to some degree of the patriarchy, is that it denies itself and it denies that you're affected by it. And until we can have conversations, or until we can acknowledge, negotiate space around power, we can find ourselves quite confused. And I think what I was also hearing Frederick say is something that happens about microaggressions the places where we need to practice the conversations that we are having here are in the places where we live, work, and play. It's in the places that have shamed us, and we are so out of practice to exercise our power. It hasn't started, it isn't starting in the workplace necessarily being out of practice in your power. It starts when your mom says no to something that really matters to you. And we are in the habit of being so oppressed and so repressed that we actually don't have a language for the ways that our power is violated. And by the time I'm coming into the workplace, it almost feels like a performance. And that's where we start to think it's inauthentic to access those parts of ourselves, because we just haven't been practicing them for so long. And so I think this idea of unconditioning, as I wrap it up, thank you. This idea of an approach to unconditioning, I mean, even the mind, is a very, very difficult thing, because even in any and every place, even tonight, even in different ways, we are all having to make decisions where we are saying, how do I learn? But I think there is so much that we are circumventing by not healing first. We are talking about learning, but pain is healed before you learn from it. Wounds are healed before you learn from them. And until we can elevate and anchor some of our discourse in that manner, we will continue to struggle. And that's the hard part.
Well, my name is Akuma. I'm not going to be long. I think it's very important for us to determine why we want to talk about race relations. Why are we speaking about it, especially for the maturity and the age of our society? I think, Carla, you mentioned that there was wounds initially. I think there was a time maybe that we wanted to heal. Umama spoke about expressing yourself and being your full self at work and things like that. So I think it's very important to actually determine, why is it that we actually want to talk about race relations? I think that's just my question. It's rhetorical to everyone. And then maybe my comment is, I've just been hearing a lot of people talk about power. Sisi just spoke about power, Prof. Steyn as well. And I think that makes a huge difference. Because if we're talking then about power, I think it's a different, you might find that we might be aligned in this instance, but if you're talking about power as a whole, we might have differences in what we think.
And that makes you uncomfortable. And so white guilt is also a reality. And for you, you feel really sensitive about this because your research is about racism. And that, and maybe that people even listening to me because I'm a white man, and that makes you uncomfortable. Am I getting that? Also, you have said something of, I even asked for more white people to share, and we are already overrepresented here. Am I getting that? Oh.
Yes, so what I would like to say is I was born into apartheid. I was a baby. I was born into apartheid. So I didn't know what is going on and what is this. It was also a traumatic kind of thing for me. I have two parents, a mom and a dad. The one was more into apartheid and the other one wasn't. So as a small child, not understanding what is going on, I watched the body language of them. I didn't like my dad's body language at all with everything in life, even in relation to me. And what I saw there, I didn't like. I didn't understand the language. But I watched my mom, and she was unconditional love. I felt that in my body since I was like that. And I made the decision, I made the choice to feel that of love. I did not choose that. I did not like that energy. So I chose that and I lived it. My children grew up with the same eyes, the same heart. There's no judgment. We all love who we come in connection with. We have relationship with what we have and what's coming into our lives. Doesn't matter what the color, because it's from here. It's something that I felt, and I will stick to that because it's something of love. It's something of unconditional. And I think we missed the point. If we start to talk about color or race or power, there's something we miss about humanity, and that's love.
Charles Darwin's The Origins of Species was published in the same year with Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations in 1796. It's not a coincidence. It's not an accident. It was a construct. That was the time when empire thought that scientific racism made sense. And that scientific racism could be an excuse for slavery, for exploitation, for siphoning resources, and for conquering certain geographies and certain bodies. That's how messy, that's how bloody, and that's how, gloomy this monstrosity is. It was thought out. So somebody did say, what are we doing? What are we supposed to do? So thinking itself and engaging is activism. Because this whole crime scene that we're involved in was thought out. And it needs to be unthought out. Adam Smith's invisible hand, which was that advice to empire that exploit other people's labor, barbarize them, after that, hang them, was a construct. And it worked for empire. Charles Darwin's suggestion that speciesism works and that you can inferiorize, you superiorize, and you benefit from it, it was a construct. Yeah. And we need to go back to the thinking and the construction of these things. The systems, Melissa, and the institutions are just artifacts of those thoughts. My last contribution, I live in Pretoria, I work in Joburg. To see that these constructs are real. There's a certain cave when you're driving in N1, where you have Alex here, and you have Santin here. That place is so real. In that if you park your car there and you stand, you can smell the sewerage from Alex, and you can smell the best food in Africa from Santin. If you want to use your eyes, not your sense of smell, you can look and see the tin shacks and see the skyscrapers. There's no God that came down and said, let this be. There's no ancestor that came down and defined that geographic artifact. It's empire. And we need to be dealing with that. And that has nothing to do with good feelings. It has nothing to do with good conversations. But thank you for generating this and getting us here. I'm just trying to think like Enrique Dussel. If I'm getting close to that, thank you.
So that's rich. Let me just get the essence of that. So what I hear you say is that your fear is what is happening now, is that it's kind of in a direction of good feelings. And what is happening is we need more than a direction into good feelings or just a conversation. There was a real crime that have happened. This is the results of real crime. There's real artifacts that you can see, you can smell, you can taste it. Of the results of this crime. And real people have created constructs. And that constructs from Darwin already that have developed till here today in 2023. The conversation need to shift from a conversation and from good feelings to you have used a beautiful word, could you help me with that word? It needs to be confrontational. It needs to be confrontational. The constructs need to change. The artifacts need to change.
Yeah, and because we're running out of time, you can just put it here, Gobas. I'll just give you an opportunity to, I know with Melissa, there were specific questions too, so I'm just gonna quickly remind you, and Carla, Melissa, Mamnonku, you can respond to as you do your closing remarks. Someone raised an issue around finding interest in each other, because then we learn about the context. The gentleman here spoke about being worried about the future. He feels like he's not welcomed. What do we do that often makes people perhaps feel that way? That's how he feels. The young guy spoke about how to show up and be authentic when the environment suppresses your true reality. I'm proud, I'm confident, I know the truth, but is the environment there conducive? A lady spoke about performative. Is it a performance? Because we need to heal first. That's the point she was making. We can't learn with unhealed wounds. The gentleman spoke about power, or is it about race? Carla spoke about white guilt. Why can't we be okay with the questions that come? Why do we need to also voice what white voices from what I got from her? Because now we were deliberately saying, where are the white voices? Which is a conversation we had around, are we not sometimes forceful towards allow Black people maybe to express? And if a white person wants to express, they express themselves. The important thing around representation as well, Mamnonku, which is a good feedback. Funny enough, you and I had this conversation in our meeting, but that's something that's been raised. The 4 questions that were specific for you, Melissa, Liesel felt like this feels like a therapy session, wants you to address white fragility, the white complex, the multiple forms of intersectionality and the forms of oppression, and do we frame things from a privileged point of view? And she also raised the issue of representation. If you can, I don't know if you want to start, maybe Melissa, because you had specific questions, and then we'll come to Caroline and Mamnonku.
You know, the difficulty with any process like this is that we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of the real conversations. And so it is, I think, problematic for us to leave it at this point. I mean, I must say that I'm not familiar with this process that has been used this evening. And so for me, it's very different from what the ways in which we would normally approach at the center. But I think that, you know, when it comes to questions of race, I always say we have to be methodologically promiscuous, you know, because these are such complex, such difficult issues that what works for one person, you know, it may not work for some people, but it might land for another person. And so we have to be prepared to enter into different processes. And so, you know, I think that has been the way in which I hope that we engage with tonight as one possible way in which we can be chipping away at this very difficult, the difficult construct and the way in which it has positioned us and the effects and consequences and wounds that have been created. So I've been asked to say something about white fragility. I think there, again, I feel I need to say that with the kind of process that was facilitated this evening, you know, we don't have, as it were, ground rules around, you know, talking, and we don't actually have a theoretical framework that's framing our discussion. And for that reason, it really has just brought out what's in the room. And, you know, of course, points of view that are expressed or experiences that are shared are problematic for some of the other people in the audience. And I think that, you know, this is sort of like inevitable unless unless we're doing a different kind of process. So I think the question of white fragility appears through the way in which we know that there's a tendency to recenter the white experience and to refocus attention on sort of like white, almost like victimhood, if I could put it that way. And that in some ways that can detract from the actual, because we're talking about creating a safe space. And the problem is like, what is a safe space? Because when, when white people feel safe, very often they're creating an environment that doesn't feel safe for Black people. And so I think that this is something that we're going to need to really, really put our heads together around. How do we facilitate conversations so that we don't bring that dynamic into place? And the question of intersectionality, sorry, oh, I've done something. Sorry, I've not been well inside. The question of intersectionality, I mean, that would be another thing that I think that is quite important if we worked with a more theoretical framing of the conversation, because it's a serious issue if somebody like you is feeling that this conversation excluded you, like it's not actually speaking to your positionality in society, and we do need to hold all the different ways in which we are oppressed, in which we are oppressing each other. Yeah. All right, we need to hold them together in their complexity. So I think that would be another really important point, but may not be what the facilitators meant. That might not be what their methodology works towards, because as you said, it feels like a therapy session. So for myself, I've wanted to learn what I can and to try to go with the process and see where it takes me. But if it has caused you to feel excluded, I want to apologize to you, because clearly, that's not okay. But I hope that there has been value for you, and that you could perhaps just bracket the process, as sort of like, it's not the last word in the conversation at all. It's just one possible moment in the unfolding conversation that we're having. And so, yes, the cost of the conversations, I mean, this is always true, isn't it? Is that even when we do it on radio or whatever, there's always, because these issues are so sensitive, and because we are wounded, and we are wounded in different ways, the same conversation is not necessarily the conversation that a particular people need, So I think we also need to think about how do we continue our process so that we also get more spaces where people can work through more specificity around their own wounding. Yeah. So I don't know if that actually speaks to your questions, but it's sort of like the best I can do right now.
And afterwards we can exploit much further. Yes, Kaza, your last words.
So yes, ending off, I would like to say, I was a minister. I actually left ministry because I wanted to give something more solid to people, more scientific to people, that's based And Einstein was one of the people that said true religiosity, when you honor your true soul, your true authenticity, it never fights with science. There is a way to unite it. And I think that no matter what the conclusion is of today, we all came in here with the intention to unite, and that's a start. We don't have a map, as we said. We don't know how we're going to conclude on this, but at least we started with this. And as a imago clinical therapist, as well as I've trained in it, that's why I helped Cobus to mirror that. I would love to share personal experience now. This is not from a professional, but it's not anything to do with, I know I'm more on the humanities side, but I'm also studying the scientific sides as well to see the evidence that what the life demonstrates to us. And now, apart from the professional career, I started off with the clinical immunotherapy for professional gain because I really wanted to give a space to people to feel loved and to experience love. And I know that that's where, when you feel seen and you feel loved, you are feeling worthy to actually go be yourself, put your intentions in this country, contribute, make your contribution here. And the experience was more a personal gain at the end with my husband, actually, in the sense of where all those parts where you spoke about power with your mother. Sorry, I can't remember your name. Yes, you. Where you spoke about the power, where and you, your daughter, speaking about the amygdala. We are all literally like animals, like a dog being hurt where it's been kicked and hurt in the slums. And of course, our amygdala is going to be on flight and fight response constantly, where we're going to seek, how can I dodge this? But only when you start to learn, it's okay, I can have this conversation again. I can have this. Today is different. That is the words that make the biggest difference to me. So I would love to encourage everybody else not to say what hasn't happened, because the masses live in a world of gain and loss, what we've lost and what we didn't gain. But the master lives in a world of transformation. And if you take the time to truly say, what did you learn today? What was different today? What was different than all the other conversations? Then you're taking 1 degree already in a different direction than just making up your mind and saying that everything was the same. Everything was unheard, unseen, understood. Make that conscious decision that you do want to step into connection, because in connection is where the change happens. If we really embrace the diversity, science and spirit, and all of the things together, all the diversity, when we embrace all of that together, that's where you make 1 degree shift, and that's already taking us in a completely different direction. So as a last word, take the time and decide for yourself what was different today for you in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much to everybody for your input today. You know, we can sit and plan, and I tried very much, actually, not to plan, not to try to direct, not to try and control. I wanted this conversation to evolve in whatever manner, you know, let's just be open to it. And I'm glad we've had this conversation, because what is different from me is having Black and white people talking about race. I've never been in a conversation like that, personally. Yes. I've never had that opportunity. And of course, we're all coming from different places. And what I've learned here today is that we are so socialized. I could sense it. I could feel it. I could feel like, you know, I said, I wish we could put down the mask, but the masks were on. They were really, really on, the masks. So when the masks are on, of course, we're not going to have a full, authentic, honest conversation. And for me, that is a lesson to say the road is long, but we started. And in starting, our next conversation will not be like this, right? Because there is a layer that is removed. The fact that we could sit in a room, no one ran away, right? We all sat here and we looked at each other and we shared. So, and I don't want to be defensive about anything. I'm not going to apologize about anything. I just want to say that you can be sure that this is not the last you are hearing of this thing. We're gonna take this forward. We're gonna move this conversation, and with better having, we're gonna have a debrief to learn from this conversation. But each one of you have a responsibility to take whatever little you got here today to share with your family, with your colleagues, and start this chain that is going to change our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mambo and Peru. And let's thank you guys for being here and for listening and for participating. I think what Dr. Mpofu said there about having good conversations and how we must not leave here feeling all, I think that's what I take, Dr. Mpofu. I'm leaving here and I'm uncomfortable. And I'm so happy to feel uncomfortable because that's it. You want to say something?
I really do just have to chirp in and say that having these conversations is difficult, and it's about developing the muscles. This is what we have to do: is we have to develop the muscles to have these conversations.
Which is why I'm so happy. It's like at the gym. When you gym, you feel the pain. That means something is happening. And the fact that we're here and some people are offended, some people think some people were less or oversensitive. I think, Mamnonku, you've achieved what you wanted to do. And thank you for that. Because often when you're offended outside of this safe environment. And the fact that I'm feeling here, and I can't wait to debrief because I've got so many thoughts, I felt uncomfortable, I felt offended. That for me is what I take. Because it's better to be offended in a space like this than outside, because that's not control. So thanks to you. And thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And if you want to debrief with any of them afterwards to continue sharing some thoughts, we'll be there outside. Please make sure you get the book as well. Thank you.